West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
You have Republicans who will say that the Justice Department is full of political operatives who are working to help President Biden and hurt President Trump. And they'll even say that the FBI should be defunded. What's your reaction to that kind of language? And what do you say on behalf of DOJ?
Those claims bear no resemblance to the Justice Department that I know. The Justice Department that I know is filled with dedicated men and women, investigators, lawyers, prosecutors, analysts, professional staff who get up every day, Pierre. They get up every day without regard to who's in the White House or who's in Congress. It really bothers me when I hear those claims because it does a disservice to the men and women of the Justice Department. It contributes to the toxicity that you're speaking about. And
political threats.
Well, what we've seen is an unprecedented rise in threats to public officials across the board, law enforcement agents, prosecutors, judges, and election officials. And we are seeing that and responding to it.
And, you know, I know you don't want to talk about any particular candidate, but when people are using words like poison the blood and calling DOJ officials thugs, is that helpful?
Well, of course, it's not helpful. I get something called urgent reports. These are reports that come in from the field, from U.S. attorneys all across the country. And on a weekly basis, sometimes more often, I am getting reports about threats to public officials, threats to our prosecutors, threats to law enforcement agents who work in the Justice Department, threats to judges. In fact, just this week, Pierre, we've had cases involving threats to kill FBI agents, a Supreme Court justice, and 3 presidential candidates.
3.
That's just this week.
This is Michael Popak, Legal AF. When Donald Trump goes after judges, judges are the subject of assassination attempts or threats. Same thing for FBI agents, same thing for prosecutors and their families. There's no other way to put it. There is a direct link between Donald Trump's rhetoric, his violent attacks, his acting out, despite the various judges trying to gag him, and what happens on the ground, and what happens with law enforcement who has to now investigate and protect parts of our political and justice system. There's no other way to put it. This call and response between Donald Trump and his followers and those that are crazed within his following is well documented. There's every judge who's dealt with it on a gag order basis to decide whether Donald Trump should be gagged has also generally observed in their orders that Donald Trump knows that he has tremendous impact and influence over his followers, and he does it anyway and on purpose. He knows if he pushes the button, something will happen. A missile will fire. towards his political enemies. There's no greater example of that than January 6th. He fomented the riot and the insurrection. He wound up that crowd of MAGA, and he weaponized them, or knew that they had actual weapons, and he pointed that loaded weapon directly at the Capitol and at his political opponents and at elected officials, and then ran away and acted like, well, it's like the child who accidentally sets fire to something in his home. Oh, I didn't do that. I didn't light that match. I didn't use that kerosene. I didn't use that kindling wood. Well, that's exactly what he did. And judges, all the way up to the appellate level, have recognized that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection and rebellion. We've got two federal judges, Beryl Howell and Judge Carter in California, who have said already that Donald Trump, it's more likely that he committed a crime related to Mar-a-Lago and related to January 6th and the pressure campaign on Mike Pence to try to avoid the peaceful transfer of power. That was months ago. That was a year ago when those decisions were made. Then the 91 indictments around the country, 91 felony counts against Donald Trump in 3 separate indictments. We already know that has happened. The civil fraud case that's going on in New York, right? All the cases that have judged Donald Trump to be a rapist and somebody who defames other people. And his response to all of this has been to attack his enemies, what he perceives as his enemies: judges, jurors, grand jurors, special grand jurors, FBI agents, and the like. And what they've written, all of these judges, in observing this conduct and this behavior, is that Donald Trump knows exactly what he's doing, and he knows that violent rhetoric turns into violent action in the hands of his followers. And so now the Department of Justice has to clean up behind the elephant, along with the FBI, investigate, arrest, indict, protect all of these people. I mean, it is a mind-boggling statistic that we just heard, that what the Department of Justice and the FBI basically call sort of a week, 1 week, presidential candidates, Supreme Court justices, state Supreme Court justices, are all, and judges are all the subject of assassination threats. And we have the Department of Justice and the FBI doing a full court press in order to avoid a tragedy. We went through a period in American society, American history, during the 60s, where civil rights leaders, presidents, and presidential candidates were all assassinated. We forget that, In the 80s, we had, the Pope. Somebody took a shot at the Pope. Somebody took a shot at Ronald Reagan. In the 60s, we lost a series of leaders and presidential candidates. Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, President Kennedy, and the list goes on. We could do a whole podcast, a week-long podcast about people that were assassinated in the United States on domestic soil by other Americans. And so we have that as a historical backdrop, things that happened in the 80s. And if anybody thinks the pressurizing of America and the shredding of the social contract that keeps us together and keeps us civil and keeps us as a united Americans isn't in tatters and shreds at our feet, then they're not paying attention. Does anybody think that the 80s were worse for putting people at each other's throats than they are now? I mean, Reagan never did that. I mean, Reagan had his own issues and problems from a historical and presidential context, but he didn't pit Americans against each other the way that Donald Trump does. We didn't have social media during those periods, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Now, with social media, foreign influence and attempts to brainwash Americans by Chinese, Russian, and others, trying to pit, American against American and put each other's at each other's throats. And now a presidential candidate that tries to use that and foment that discontent, foment that civil war possibility within America in order for his own benefit to get elected again. Does anybody think that today there's less of a chance of assassinations happening on American soil than in the 80s or the 60s or more? That's not rhetorical. Think about it. And I would posit, and as just outlined by Lisa Monaco, that we live in a treacherous and dangerous time, especially when one of the two presidential candidates is trying to use that to his political advantage. And what are the real world consequences? We've only heard about week one. 1 week in the life of an FBI agent or the Department of Justice trying to protect judges, presidential candidates, U.S. Supreme Court justices. We have to think this goes on a daily basis, on a yearly basis, with dozens and dozens and dozens of assassination attempts and assassination threats. We know it. We know that every judge that's been adjudicating something related to Donald Trump has received some sort of death threat, except for a couple of rare exceptions. Judge Chutkan, D.C. Circuit Court judge presiding over the trial in March against Donald Trump brought by the special counsel, death threats delivered to her chambers. Judge Engoron, the judge up in the civil fraud case brought by the New York Attorney General against Donald Trump, he has, his wife has, staff has, all received death threats. Thousands of them, not one isolated. Same thing with the New York Attorney General. Same thing with Fani Willis, the district attorney for Fulton County, Georgia. She wears, and her staff wear, bulletproof vests. Judge Chutkan is taken to or from her chambers with armed federal marshals, which didn't happen before. Same thing for Fani Willis's staff. They're armed. They're wearing bulletproof vests, and the sheriff's department helps them get to and from doing their job. Scott McAfee, the judge down in Georgia, has had criminal threats, has had assassination threats against him. Really, every judge that's unfortunately been assigned to the case of Donald Trump, Beryl Howell, the former chief judge of the D.C. Circuit Court, all the appellate judges that have handled cases and have ruled against Donald Trump have received some sort of death threat, and law enforcement and the prosecutors have to deal with it. This, as I said earlier, this call and response, the stochastic terrorism of Donald Trump. And so it's important that we don't just get fatigued by Donald Trump's craziness, treasonous behavior. We have to call it out when we see it, and we have to understand that that's just the tip of the iceberg. Right below that surface are real Americans who have crosshairs on their back and could be assassinated at any moment. And then this report on this hot take is completely different. We're trying to avoid that. Think about how close we were to having elected officials hanged and worse by the angry mob created by Donald Trump that was launched on them on Jan 6th. Staff and elected officials, senators and congresspeople, staffers, Capitol Police and Metro Police, who all could have died that day had the rabble, had the insurrectionists been able to fully execute the plan that they had that had been put in place and led by Donald Trump. And so that should have been a wake-up call in America, right? To take steps and efforts in order to avoid bloodshed on American soil. Students of history remember the 60s and our loss of all those leaders through assassination and the soul-searching that went on in America as a result. Apparently, those lessons, those history lessons, are lost on this current generation. Shouldn't be, right? Past is prologue. We learn about it, right? History repeats itself. We're only, in historical context, 50 years removed from the 1960s, right? 30 years, 40 years removed from the 1980s. It's not a lot in historical world. And now throw into the mix the kerosene of social media being squeezed onto the flames by Donald Trump. And so every time we hear about these assassination attempts, these assassination threats, These threats to kill or do worse to prosecutors, Department of Justice, judges, justices, Supreme Court justices, and the like. It needs to be a wake-up call. Continue to follow it here on the Midas Touch Network and on Legal AF. We sit at the intersection of law, politics, and justice, so you don't have to. We do it on a full-length podcast that we curate on Wednesdays and Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, only on the Midas Touch Network. Free subscribe, help them get to 2 million before the first quarter of 2024. It's very, very important for democracy and our continuation of democracy. And follow me on all things social media at MS Popak. Until my next hot take, until my next Legal AF, this is Michael Popak reporting.
It is Wednesday, the 27th of December of 2023. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious, the little Yorkie, is our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special, Smothered Benedict Wednesday. So, will someone please rid us of these meddlesome freaks and remind us what day of the week it is? You know, when you have a holiday on Monday that feels like Sunday, it throws everything off. Yikes. I got to get that circadian rhythm going again. Oh, yeah, I can feel it. Alrighty, so sorry for the choice of having a longer clip. Actually, I'm not sorry because I think that it was succinctly put. But I needed a little bit of time to care for, well, my mom this morning. We did get some relatively good news, as I mentioned yesterday. Took her in for an evaluation. They actually hooked her up to an EKG. Did a few other tests, and so we're going to go back for a follow-up, and hopefully that's in just next week is what we're hoping. And when I say we, it's the royal we. I'm hoping, and I know Mom is too. But she needs more blood and oxygen to the brain, and I mean that literally. So that's what this is all about. But the preliminary assessment is that she should be good to go. But we got to take a bit of care. She'll be on some other. They're going to put her on some other medications or included in the medications she takes to, I guess, mess around with the chemistry to keep the heart going. And when they put the stent in, of course, you know, they've got to cut into that artery. And anytime that there's bleeding, that changes the chemistry, and that's where you can have some problems. But, you know, this is a little bit more than just, working on your car, though it has somewhat of the same properties and ideas. You just got to be a little bit more careful. So that's actually good news. There's always some concern, as we all know. Anything could happen. And so there's that. But no one wants to have a stroke. And I got to tell you, I come from a society, and I know it's fragmented, but the fragmented part of our society that believes that, you don't want anyone to get a stroke if we can help it. There's other people who just don't care. And we know who they are. Oh, yeah. So that's the news, and we just need to take a bit of care. Okay, so that's the update on the personal. And I actually thought that the longer clip by Medias, I only know what I read. I need to hear their name. But regardless, I've decided to pick up a few of their clips because, well, not only is it a holiday and all the staff at the major cable outlets are on vacation. How dare they? Don't they know news is still happening? So they have the skeleton crew. They can't keep up, I can tell. But also, there's a bit of corporate dictates over at MSNBC that are a little bit unseemly. And I don't mean like it's a bad thing that Mehdi Hassan's gone. Okay, I mean, I've had my issues with him. We all have. Maybe we all haven't. There's no absolutes, but regardless, it's a little rhetorical flourish. Anyway, there's other, just, I don't know, the doom and gloom. The Biden poll numbers are so terrible, and I'm like, actually, there's some Biden poll numbers that have him doing quite well, and apparently those are outliers. Can't mention that the economy is booming because of Joe, because no president is ever responsible for an economy. I don't care whether they are or not. It plays well in Peoria, and it has, so why not take credit like everybody else has? If the Republicans are able to just trounce everything bad about what we are and what we do, can't we just like tout some good things that we are and what we've done? And Joe's been, the lead on that. Let's be clear. When you look at the list of accomplishments, and we hear every now and then, it's like better than FDR. You know what? It's better than FDR. Just in sheer numbers. And look at all the conflict and obstruction arrayed against that. And he still got it done. Old doddering Joe. Jesus. All right. So, I know I'm going off, but it just bothers me. Why can't we just, tout that we're doing okay? And look what Joe's been doing. Which brings me to another part of this greater concern. We are under an assault by hostile foreign actors, and we better embrace the fact that war has been declared upon the United States by these hostile foreign actors, and yes, I mean Vlad. Maybe to a lesser degree Xi, certainly Jean Kim Un. So if that's the case, anybody working for those people, anybody doing any kind of advocacy, benign, known or unknown, are working against the interests of the United States and are at best idiots. Useful idiots. Maybe dupes. But I think in many cases they're full-blown paid assets. I wonder where the money drop is. It's in crypto. Which means they're probably not getting paid. If I was an asset, I wouldn't be getting paid in crypto. Give me a break. Okay. But maybe that's why I'm not an asset. Or any of these other kinds of things. So that's stated. We recognized at the very beginning of this Israeli-Hamas conflict. Immediately we started hearing about stop the genocide. What was that about? It's like, this is the thing that gets me. They've been working on this PSYOPs, this agitprop, and they just can't wait to implement it. It's like trying to coach a youth football team, and you're trying to explain to them, you got to run a little bit slow so your blockers can get in place to be able to set the blocks. Otherwise, you're going to get tackled. They just can't wait to start throwing deep, and they're not ready to have their blockers out there to, protect the passer or the runner, what the case may be. And I said right from the beginning, this doesn't sound right. Then we started hearing about these massive protests with signs and bridge blockages and people abandoning cars on the bridge and getting towed away and no one coming back to claim them. And I mentioned on this show, who has the money to rent a car, buy a car, whatever, and just abandon it on the Bay Bridge to get towed away And then have all those toll fees accrued daily, by the way. It used to be bad. It was hourly. That's when it was really corrupt. But who has that kind of money to just buy a car, rent a car, whatever? You got to put a credit card against it and walk away. And these protests are still going on, accosting the Holocaust Museum. Yeah, it ain't grassroots. It is AstroTurf. And I am feeling more and more that it is truly backed by a hostile foreign power, not just Bannon and Flynn, though both of those guys are on board. Which goes to my other point. Anybody working for a hostile foreign power against the interests of the United States when they have declared war on us makes them, yes, a traitor. Whether that includes the ultimate penalty should be adjudicated by a court, shouldn't it? Not up to me. But if they are working against the interests of the United States of America actively, while at the same time trashing everything about America and Americans themselves, meaning you and me, what does that make them? Benedict Arnolds? I think it's something a little worse than that. Okay, what do we have in store for you? As we had that exceedingly long clip at the top, but it was good. What do we have in store for you here in the Bistro Cafe as we begin on this Smothered Benedict Wednesdays? The Michigan Supreme Court just ruled that Trump will remain on the state's primary election ballot. I haven't had enough time to dive into that this morning to figure out what the hell is going on, especially, well, obviously, the recently released tapes of him doing the perfect call to get people to hew his way and lie about the electoral vote. I guess that wasn't presented as evidence, apparently. Disney has filed a lawsuit claiming that the oversight government appointed by DeSantis has failed to release documents and properly preserve records in violation of Florida public records law. And Maryland lawmakers grappling with multi-billion-dollar budget shortfalls are weighing proposals to tax the rich. Oh, horrors. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Argentina's newly elected neo-fascist president laid off 5,000 government employees hired in the year before he took office. And Sweden moved a step closer to NATO membership after Turkey's parliamentary committee gave its approval. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Go the usuals and tuck into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And it is out of the Associated Press by Corey Williams and Nicholas Riccardi. Michigan's Supreme Court is keeping Donald Trump on the state's primary election ballot. The court said earlier today, which is Wednesday, it will not hear an appeal of a lower court's ruling from groups seeking to keep Trump from appearing on the ballot. It said in an order that the application by parties to appeal a December 14th Michigan Appeals Court judgment was considered but denied because, quote, we are not persuaded that the questions presented should be reviewed by this court, end quote. Well, aren't you deciding on state election laws? The ruling contrasts with the December 19 decision by a divided Colorado Supreme Court, which found Trump ineligible to be president because of his role in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. I think we call that an insurrection. Come on, AP. Get on the ball. Now, that ruling was the first time in history the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment had been used to disqualify a presidential candidate. Well, we never had one running for office who had conspired against the United States of America to bring it down, except for Jefferson Davis, and that's why the 14th Amendment was made. Now, let me also mention something about the 14th Amendment. It's not just some quaint thing that they decided to add. The process for making an amendment become part of the Constitution is one of the most rigorous political acts that can be accomplished. You had to have all those states ratify it, and all those people, and it takes time. So to put it in the Constitution didn't mean that it was only supposed to mean this one little narrow thing to keep Jefferson Davis from running for president. It was put there so that anybody like a Jefferson Davis would never hold the highest office in the land. How do you like them apples? How do you like that hyperbole? How do you like that rhetorical flourish? The Michigan and Colorado cases are among dozens hoping to keep Trump's name off state ballots. They all point to the so-called, AP, what the hell are you doing? So-called insurrection clause? It only says it right there. The so-called insurrection clause that prevents anyone from holding office, and then they quote it. Engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the Constitution. How is that the so-called insurrection clause when it is called the insurrection clause? Well, until the Colorado ruling, all had failed to keep Trump off the ballot. The Colorado ruling, of course, is likely to be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, which has never ruled on the rarely used Civil War era provision. And you know these guys are still fighting the Southern battle. Oh, yeah, the war of Northern aggression. Now, the plaintiffs in Michigan can technically try to disqualify Trump under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment in the general election, though it's likely there will be a U.S. Supreme Court ruling on the issue by then. Maybe. Schneider of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Disney has filed a lawsuit claiming that the oversight government for Walt Disney World, which was taken over by appointees of Ron DeSantis earlier this year, has failed to release documents and properly preserve records in violation of Florida public records law. Disney said in the lawsuit that the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District, often referred to as CFTOD, Really? Is that how they do it? Has been so slow in fulfilling its public records duties that it has failed to respond completely to a request the company made 7 months ago when it paid more than $2,400 to get emails and text messages belonging to the 5 district board members appointed by DeSantis. Disney, DeSantis, and the DeSantis appointees already are battling for control of the government in 2 pending lawsuits in federal and state court. The public records lawsuit is asking a judge to review any documents that the district claims are exempt from being released, declare that the district is violating state public records law, and order the district to release the documents that Disney has requested. The CFTOD has prevented Disney from discovering the actions of its government through public records requests in violation of Florida law, said the lawsuit filed in state court in Orlando. The court should grant Disney relief. An email sent to the Central Florida Tourism Oversight District was seeking comment, but of course they never respond. Has anyone ever? The new lawsuit claims that the district is failing to follow public records law in other ways, such as allowing the DeSantis-appointed board members to use personal email addresses and texts for district business without a process for making sure they are preserved, and failing to make sure board members don't auto-delete messages dealing with district business. Ovetta Wiggins of the Washington Post brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Maryland lawmakers grappling with multi-billion-dollar budget shortfalls are weighing proposals to tax the rich. Levying a millionaire's tax, targeting capital gains income from stock market earnings, and broadening the estate tax are among many varied ideas under consideration to raise money for transportation and education, according to several leading Democratic lawmakers. Everything is broadly on the table, said Senate Budget and Taxation Committee Chair Guy Guzone. I don't think anything's off the table, said House and Ways Means Committee Chair Vanessa Atterbury. This is the session to do something if we're going to do it, she said, of the impending General Assembly session in January. You know, some folks say wait till next session. I say rip the Band-Aid off and let's just solve the problem. Well, let's do it. Maryland's perplexing economic indicators, historically low unemployment but also stagnant growth, have not delivered the revenue needed to fund Democratic lawmakers' ambitions. Well, that's one way of putting it. And while a flood of federal pandemic aid disguised the underlying problem, the help evaporated and leaders find themselves confronted with the politically fraught prospect of finding new money. I don't think it's new money. It's old money that's been laying around, and people ought to collect it. In this reporter's opinion, a coalition of 30 advocacy groups, the Maryland Fair Funding Coalition, has seized the moment, throwing $250,000 behind ad campaigns during the last few weeks of the year to build public support for changes they say would yield $1.6 billion more annually in revenue. Now, some liberal county executives who have long sought a tax code that shifted more tax burden to the businesses and the wealthy are advocating for it too. Proposals under consideration by top Democrats vary from a comprehensive top-to-bottom shift of tax burden from the middle class to higher earners and corporations to piecemeal ideas to tax online poker games or raise fees for government services. Well, that's not taxing the rich. The prospect of tax increases are all but certain to land with a thud among Maryland Republicans, who are outnumbered 2-1 by Democrats. So forget the thud for once. Now, tax talks are in the early stage, as the Democrats who hold supermajorities in both chambers have not coalesced around a single tax increase concept, nor sought even an agreement in principle with Governor Wes Moore, who is, of course, a Democrat. Moore's public comments about the budget problems have focused on growing the economy to close the gap between the ruling party's ambitions and the state's balance sheets. He has warned about discipline in the upcoming year and having to say no to some key priorities. I don't know, tax the rich and tell them no. In a December speech, he warned that Maryland residents tell him they feel like they're paying too much in taxes for what they receive in return. Well, what better argument is there to tax the rich? All right, let us now go to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. This week, A Flight of Pure Imagination. Those looking for the big reveal or plot twist in Wonka are not going to find it. As far as prequels go, this one plays it safe and predictable, but that's okay for family holiday fare. Inspired by, but not beholden to the Roald Dahl classic, Wonka imagines the titular hero in his early days as a poor but plucky young man determined to make it in the London candy business. However, he quickly learns there are several obstacles to his dreams. To begin with, he finds himself staying at an inn/laundry business run by an unscrupulous businesswoman, played by a fantastic Olivia Colman, and unable to leave until he pays off his debt. Secondly, it turns out breaking into the candy business is going to be even harder than he thought, due to the corrupt local chocolate cartel that makes it clear there's not enough room in town for another candy maker. Undeterred, Wonka bonds with a fellow indentured servant at the laundry, Noodle, and the two seek to earn their freedom and make Willie's dreams a reality. In the lead, Timothée Chalamet manages to come across as charming, vulnerable, and believable. Not an easy feat given the nature of the role. In lesser hands, it might come off as ridiculous, but Chalamet pulls it off. Likewise, in a small but memorable role as an Oompa Loompa, Hugh Grant delivers by wisely not playing the role as cute, but rather as a world-weary traveler who's been trying in vain to have Wonka pay him back for chocolate inadvertently stolen earlier. The end result is funny, with Grant's scenes being arguably the best in the film. Overall, Wonka is a bit like the candy Willie makes, sweet and sugary, but fine as an occasional treat. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Kim Lowe. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is the story of a very special woman. In a matter of seconds, she turned herself into a great mathematician or an entrepreneur. Her knowledge was limitless and still is. She could also make monsters disappear, especially those that lurked in the shadows under the bed. Once, this woman put back together a teenage girl's broken heart, which had been shattered in 1,000 pieces. just by giving her a bear hug. She masqueraded as a regular person at work, but as a superhero at home. Everyone knows her as Gabriella. I still call her Mom.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need to help, complete with tips and resources at aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
If you thought that courts wouldn't try to further gut the 1965 Voting Rights Act, think again. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. In 2013, the Supreme Court, 5-4, in a case from Shelby County, Alabama, killed more than half of the historic Voting Rights Act of 1965 by striking down what's called preclearance. Preclearance meant that a state or county with a long history of racial discrimination in voting had to get an okay, a preclearance, from a federal court or the Department of Justice before it changed its voting procedures. After the court killed preclearance, areas with racially biased voting histories closed polling places, purged voter rolls, truncated early voting, instituted racially biased voter ID laws, and so on. Then, in 2023, the Supreme Court, which has blessed blatant political gerrymandering in a clear case of racially motivated gerrymandering, did not strike down the rest of the Voting Rights Act. A big sigh of relief was warranted. But the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals has just ruled that private citizens and civil rights groups no longer can bring a challenge under the Voting Rights Act. If that case were to be upheld by the Supreme Court, it would gut what remains of that crucially important law. We await the High Court's decision. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
You're listening to the American Democracy Minute, keeping your government by and for the people. In October, the U.S. State Department circulated a report to countries around the world warning of ongoing Russian election interference. Analysts are now drawing a picture of what Russian interference might look like in the 2024 U.S. election. The online news outlet The Diplomat suggests that Donald Trump's boast in May that he'd end the Ukraine war in one day and declining support for Ukraine by Republican legislators in Congress will be amplified by Russia via social media and influencers. Vladimir Putin is widely seen as wanting to weaken NATO and its member nations' support for Ukraine's pending membership. Reports from the Microsoft Threat Analysis Center and Meta underscore those fears. Meta recently removed a cluster of accounts tied to Russian state media and noted Russian-backed accounts are building followers before the election. Microsoft reports that Russia continues to use cyber attacks, hack and leak operations, and covert social media personas to erode support for democracy and Ukraine. It also expects Russia to exploit generative AI for disinformation. Authoritarian regimes appear to see a second Trump presidency in their best interests. Beyond Ukraine, China hopes to weaken U.S. resolve on Taiwan, and both Russian and Iranian disinformation are amplifying the Hamas-Israeli war as proof of declining U.S. influence. See our resources at AmericanDemocracyMinute.org. I'm Brian Beal.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2011. That was the day the National Labor Relations Board ruled that musicians in Lancaster, Pennsylvania were employees, not independent contractors. Veteran musicians with the Lancaster Symphony Orchestra attempted to organize a union in 2007. They challenged the dictatorial methods by which musicians were treated. They wanted a contract to spell out the rules for hiring, firing, auditioning, grievance procedures, and more. When it came time to sign union cards, the symphony opposed the election, claiming the musicians were independent contractors. The musicians filed with the Regional Labor Board. After receiving an unfavorable ruling, they turned to the national offices in Washington, D.C. There, the board utilized the common law agency test to determine the musician's status. These questions are to discern how much control workers have over the way they work, whether they are highly skilled, how they're paid, and if they provide their own tools, or in this case, instruments. When more answers tilt toward yes, workers are considered independent contractors. The NLRB determined that though these workers are paid on a 1099 instead of a W-2 form, they are employees because of their working conditions. They concluded that orchestral management exerted a great deal of control. Management determined musicians' dress, their posture and behavior before, during, and after rehearsals and concerts. Management also imposed discipline and firings. Musicians voted to join the Greater Lancaster Federation of Musicians the next spring, but their victory was soon undercut by management's refusal to negotiate a first contract. The musicians filed an unfair labor practice and won. The symphony took the case to a federal appeals court, which settled in the union's favor in the spring of 2016.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin, whether from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 44 degrees Fahrenheit, rainy conditions, and we are still under an active wind advisory for the region, though our little protected valley of Rogue River is quite protected. Looks like we'll have light rain through the morning and then cloudy this afternoon with heavy showers, bringing with it about a quarter inch of rain for the day. Winds will be light and variable here in Rogue River. Partly cloudy skies tonight, lows near 40. Winds light and variable. A smattering of rain overnight, mostly cloudy tomorrow with highs in the low 50s, winds light and variable. Chance of a stray light rain shower or two. Pollen is rated as none here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 18 parts per million. And that daytime UV index is low at level 1. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.81 inches. Visibility is at 7 miles. And relative humidity is at 87%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. London is 54 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 51 degrees and clear. Rome is 56 and clear. Bagram is 40 degrees and clear. Kyiv is 36 and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 65 and fair. Tokyo is 44 and cloudy. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 65 degrees and cloudy. And, of course, we heard about the terrible storms that they had there, deadly storms. San Francisco, California is 56 degrees, cloudy with a high surf advisory. Do not turn your back on the ocean. Chicago, Illinois is 41 degrees and mostly cloudy with a small craft advisory for, well, you know, heavy winds and lake surf. And New York is 46 degrees Fahrenheit with rain and a dense fog advisory. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the World Desk of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. The administration of Argentina's new president, Javier Milei, said that his government won't renew contracts for more than 5,000 employees hired this year before he took office. The move was part of a sweeping plan of cutbacks and devaluations announced by the right-wing libertarian, that's a nice name for a neo-fascist, since he took office on December 10th to transform Argentina's struggling economy. The contracts for other government employees who were hired prior to 2023 will be reviewed, authorities said. The 2023 cutoff is apparently meant to target the practice of outgoing presidents padding payrolls in their final year. With inflation expected to reach about 200% by the end of the year, Milei has pledged to reduce government regulations and payrolls and allow the privatization of state-run industries as a way to boost exports and investment. I don't think that's going to work, but we'll see. The cutbacks have already drawn protests, but Milei has vowed to forge ahead. In fact, he's made it illegal to protest, and anybody who does gets arrested. Approximately 300 changes announced previously would earmark many government and companies for privatization and loosen protection for renters, employees, and shoppers, because that's the way to tackle inflation. The steps include a 50% devaluation of the Argentine peso, cuts to energy and transportation subsidies, and the closure of some government ministries. They come amid soaring inflation and rising poverty. Now, Milei, a 53-year-old economist, I thought he was a comedian, who rose to fame on television with profanity-laden tirades against what he called the political caste, became president with the support of Argentines disillusioned with the economic crisis.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Susan Fraser of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Turkish Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee gave its consent to Sweden's bid to join NATO yesterday, Tuesday, drawing the previously non-aligned Nordic country closer to membership in the Western Military Alliance. Sweden's accession protocol will now need to be approved in the Turkish Parliament's General Assembly for the last stage of the legislative process in Turkey. No date has been set. Turkey, a NATO member, has delayed ratification of Sweden's membership for more than a year, accusing the country of being too lenient towards groups that Ankara regards as threats to its security, including Kurdish militants and members of a network that Ankara blames for a failed coup in 2016. The Turkish Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee had begun discussing Sweden's membership in NATO last month, but the meeting was adjourned after legislators from Erdogan's ruling party submitted a motion for a postponement on grounds that some issues needed more clarification and that negotiations with Sweden had not matured enough. The committee, on Tuesday yesterday, resumed its deliberations, and a large majority of legislators in the committee voted in favor of Sweden's application to join. Briefing the committee members before the vote, Deputy Foreign Minister Barak Akapar cited steps that Sweden had taken to meet Turkish demands, including lifting restrictions on defense industry sales and amending anti-terrorism laws in ways that no one could have imagined 5 or 6 years ago, he said. Hungary has also stalled Sweden's bid, alleging that Swedish politicians have told blatant lies about the condition of Hungary's democracy. Hungary has not announced when the country's ratification may occur. Earlier this month, Erdogan had openly linked ratification of Sweden's NATO membership to the U.S. Congress's approval of a Turkish request to purchase 40 new F-16 fighters and kits to modernize Turkey's existing fleet. Erdogan also called on Canada and other NATO allies to lift arms embargoes imposed on Turkey. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, so do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.